Last year it was Moody's who increased our county's bond rating, and this year Standard & Poor's had followed suit. By itself, an increase in the bond rating is good news for just a short time. The real story lies in what our elected officials do or don't do with this ability to borrow money and at a very low rate. So what are the commissioners doing, Fred?
Excellent question. And at this point, I'm going to defer to Jim Miller.
We don't know at this point, right?
Exactly. That's the whole point.
It is a good point, but we don't know what they're doing. But we're interested in what they are doing. So what would you like to see them do, Fred?
Well, I'd like to see him get involved with his sons. Keep the sons here.
Okay.
I'd love to do that. I'd like to see him rejuvenate that whole thing and the county get involved in that. I'd like to see a few more activities. Maryland Theater is first on my list, I think, before the Suns, then the Suns. I'd love to see that theater become classy. Just absolutely state-of-the-art classy.
Okay. So those are all things that I don't believe are on our legislative priorities list, but great projects nonetheless. Chuck, what say you?
Well, I think the Board of Education would be more than happy to take some of that money if we decided to borrow something. I know they have a list of projects that we're not able to get to at this point, and that might not be a bad way to go.
Okay. Colin?
Certainly education would get my vote. And I tend to harp on this a lot. What my priorities would be certainly downtown improvement and anything that drives business to downtown. So whether that certainly the Ball Stadium would be a great driver, Maryland Theater would be a great driver, plus maybe some investment in transportation, road work, that can certainly use some help. And revitalization of downtown, whether it's investment into pop-up shops, a lot of the other projects that are going downtown. I mean, that certainly, we're talking about county money here, so it's not the city's money. But we have to realize that the city is the center of the county and it's the economic driver.
I think that's an interesting point you bring up. And Fred, the city is the economic, or is the hub of Washington County. And we, at least in my mind, I tend to, when we look at a city project, I think, well, how's the city going to finance it? What responsibility should the county have in terms of city projects? Should they be partners in that?
Absolutely. I think they need to be partners of all the municipalities. How many are there? 13? Mm-hmm. I don't know the exact number, but 13, I believe. And I think they have to partner with all of them in order to make it work, make it fair. But Hagerstown has to be the centric focus on that. I mean, you built Hagerstown, and I do truly believe, I'm naive, but I think the rest of the county will grow accordingly.
Chuck, I would, the alternate theory that would probably be presented by Commissioner Baker and probably others is that we shouldn't borrow the extra money. We should stay. The reason we got our bond rating increase was not because of this. It was because of the fact that we didn't borrow the money, and we've consistently stayed below our debt limit.
Try to do the kind of a pay-go kind of thing.
Right. So what would you say to Mr. Baker and others that may have that opinion with respect? Do you see that argument? Is that a valid argument?
I think it is a valid argument. However, but by the on the flip side, you have to look at if there are projects that we're going to have to finance and are going to require some borrowing. Now would be the time. I mean, rates are low, and we've got a good rating, and and let's take advantage of that.
Well, and I think there are investments that the county can make which then pay back in terms of raised revenue, right? So anything that can drive up the average wages in the county, anything that can bring in kind of, I wouldn't say wealthier inhabitants, but certainly can bring more folks that have expendable income, anything that can provide more opportunities locally for folks that may be underpaid or looking to move up, tends to have a self-propagating effect on the county itself, because once your tax base goes up, then obviously the revenue coming into the county goes up as well. Mm-hmm. So I think if we make those intelligent investments in things that actually do pay back, then it's not so much of a concern over how much we're borrowing, because it's an investment in being able to pay more in the future.
Plus, don't we Washington County have a history of managing what we have? I don't know if it's strictly we haven't borrowed money, but do we not have a history of good accounting?
Yes. We have a very solid financial past, from what at least in what I've looked at so far. And you're right, that's a good thing. but arguably the economy is on the rise again, and hopefully that will continue. And we know that historically, Washington County has been a lagging economic indicator. So we were late getting into the recession. We were late coming out of the recession. So what does that have to do? What does that affect what we should do? Does that impact what we should do in terms of the decision to borrow more money or to maintain the status quo?
Well, I think in part of that, I mean, you have to look at the whole picture, and we're looking, economic development's not something we've talked a little bit about in town, but, we have an Economic Development Commission. What requirements what would they need to do a better job? And if there's something in there even that costs money, I mean, then maybe this is the time. Because it's like you say, we're a lagger when it comes to the recovery. We are lagging now when it comes to recovery. What can we do to do if anything, to speed up that process? We're so close to so many things, but, for whatever reason, they're choosing not to build the warehouses in Hagerstown. They're building the warehouses in Chambersburg.
But let's talk about that. Let's talk about warehousing. Do we want warehouse jobs? Because in the total scheme of things, warehouse jobs are not high-paying jobs. And we have, at least historically, and I can't speak for what the current thought process is, we have more looked to facilitate growth from existing business. For example, Duvenage was the recipient of some loan guarantees or whatever a couple of years ago, and there were some other things that were announced. We have tried to stay away from those, and I know there's a lot of warehousing on both sides of us in Berkeley County and in southern Pennsylvania. Are they good jobs? Are they the kind of jobs that we want in Washington County? Well,
and I think what we really need to look at is a diversification of the types of jobs, right? So we need jobs at all different areas of the pay scale. So we certainly need high-paying jobs, but we also have to be cognizant that in order to attract those jobs, we need to have a workforce that is capable of doing them. Right. So without that, then it's very difficult. If you bring those jobs in and you're just having folks that are coming from outside of the area to fill those jobs, and then their revenue leaves the county. I think you bring up a good point, and one of the things that Washington County is very good at normally is we don't tend to have the same type of bickering that occurs in other areas where, we have this group sitting in their corner throwing things at this group sitting in the other corner. And I think really how this process should work is that the county should approach various folks like the Economic Development Commission and gather those ideas, not take them necessarily at face value, right, but have some sort of consensus and have a plan that actually addresses all the various aspects and then funnel the funding appropriately.
Have we not had those plans?
We have, and the most recent one, Stu Mullendore led he was a volunteer leading an effort to put together an economic plan for the entirety of Washington County. There were parts in it that covered Hagerstown. It was a huge undertaking, huge plan, and there were priorities that came out of that. And I guess one of the things that I would look at is if we're going to look at borrowing money, and I'm of the mind that we should look at borrowing money. I'm not sure we would take us all the way up to our debt limit, but I think we take us closer than where we are today. I'm of the mind that if those priorities are still valid, why don't we look at those priorities? Because we spent a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort to get that study done. And looking at it, and I don't remember it word for word, but there were a lot of good points in it. There really were. Well,
and I would say, to dovetail onto that, I think that's one of the things, and you bring up a good point, which is we're very good at coming up with plans. Mm-hmm. Right. We need to work on the execution.
I think we have. I've been here 30 years, and we've had 30 studies, yeah. And I don't know that any of them's ever been executed.
3 implementations,
well, they've been executed, but not implemented. There we go.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. We are planning both at the city and the county level. We've had more than our share of plans.
We have.
So it'll be interesting to see what our county commissioners do. I'm sure that we'll come back to this because we'll have more to say about it. But for right now, next up on the flip side, the Secret Service is getting a shakeup. Stay with us for that report. We'll be back in 3 minutes.